The coffee table was Italian marble, cold to the touch, just like my father's stare. My pulse remained steady. Tears are a biological response to stress, and I had already neutralized the stressor. I just said the two words that I knew would shatter their perfect image. I am pregnant. My mother, April, gasped, her hand flying to her pearl necklace like a cliché from a bad movie. But my father, Joseph? He did not blink. He did not yell. He just took a sip of his sparkling water and looked at me like I was a stock that had just crashed. "You are a liability, Stephanie," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "This family is a brand, and we do not invest in failures. You have 1 hour to pack. Don't come back until you fix this." He assumed the father was a nobody. He was wrong. I stood up. I did not beg. I just turned around and executed my exit. Before we dive deeper, I want to wish every single one of you a powerful and happy new year, 2026. Let's make this the year we all find our strength and build our own empires. I love connecting with this community, so drop a comment below, tell me where you are watching from and what time it is in your part of the world right now. And if you enjoy these stories, please support the channel by liking and subscribing. It truly helps us keep going. Now, let's go back to the night I lost everything. I walked up the stairs to my bedroom for the last time. I did not pack memories. I packed assets. My laptop. My external hard drive. The cash I had hidden in a hollowed-out biology textbook, $480 from tutoring rich kids who didn't understand chemistry. I took one heavy winter coat and 2 changes of professional clothes. I left the jewelry Joseph had bought me for my 16th birthday on the dresser. I left the photo of us from the country club. I left the girl they thought they owned. I walked out the front door without looking back. My mother was still standing in the foyer, weeping silently into a silk handkerchief, waiting for me to apologize, to beg, to promise I would fix it. I walked right past her. I got into my 10-year-old sedan, the one thing I actually owned, and locked the doors. I pulled my phone from my pocket. April. Block. Joseph. Block. I did not send a goodbye text. I did not leave a note. They had canceled my lease on their family. I was canceling my subscription to their drama. I drove until the manicured lawns of our neighborhood turned into the cracked pavement of the industrial district. I pulled into the parking lot of the Desert Rose Motel. $45 a night. The air smelled of stale tobacco and desperation. I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress and stared at the water stains on the ceiling. This was my new reality. I was 19. I was pregnant. And I had exactly enough money to survive for 11 days. Panic tried to claw its way up my throat, hot and suffocating. I shut it down. Fear was a luxury I could not afford. Emotions were expensive variables, and I was working with a zero-sum budget. I opened my laptop. I did not search for baby names. I searched for night shifts. I needed money. But more importantly, I needed a place to be awake when the rest of the world was sleeping. A place where I could disappear and rebuild. I found a listing for a graveyard shift receptionist at a chaotic biotech startup called Helix Labs. It was 20 minutes away. The ad said they needed someone organized. I wasn't just organized. I was desperate, and desperation is the highest form of fuel. I walked into that interview the next morning wearing my one good blazer, hiding my shaking hands. The office was a mess of wires, servers, and exhausted scientists running on caffeine. I told the hiring manager I could organize their chaos. I told him I didn't need sleep. He hired me on the spot, $12 an hour. It wasn't a fortune. It was a lifeline. That night, back in the motel, I ate a gas station sandwich and touched my stomach. I made a promise to the life growing inside me. You will never know this cold. You will never know this hunger. I am not a victim. I am an architect, and I am just breaking ground. Chapter 3. Breaking the Invisible Chain. The next 16 years were not a montage of lucky breaks. They were a mathematical equation of survival. Input, relentless labor. Output, incremental survival. The night shift at Helix Labs became my incubator. I typed reports while my stomach grew, and later, while Zachary slept in a bassinet under my desk, I learned to type with one hand while nursing an infant with the other. Sleep became a variable I minimized to 4 hours a night, compensated by caffeine and sheer will. But the hardest work wasn't the logistics or the spreadsheets. It was the deprogramming. My parents had raised me inside a mental prison. They had installed a belief system in my head that said I was incapable, fragile, and dependent. They had forged an invisible chain of learned helplessness, convincing me that without their money and their approval, I would wither and die. Every time I solved a problem on my own, every time I paid a bill with money I earned, I was breaking a link in that chain. I realized that the helplessness they accused me of was actually a control mechanism. They didn't protect me because I was weak. They told me I was weak so they could protect me. Breaking that chain hurt more than the hunger. It required me to murder the girl they raised so the woman I needed to be could breathe. The turning point came 2 years in. Samuel, the founder of Helix, was a brilliant scientist but a terrible businessman. He was drowning in supply chain errors. One night, while the lab was empty, I reorganized the entire procurement database. I color-coded the inventory, renegotiated 3 vendor contracts that were bleeding us dry, and automated the reordering system. When Samuel came in the next morning, he stormed over to my desk, his face red. "Who authorized you to touch the financials?" he shouted. "Logic authorized it," I said, not looking up from my monitor. "You were overpaying by 40% on reagents. I fixed it." He stared at me for a long time. Then he walked into his office and slammed the door. An hour later, he came out with a piece of paper. It wasn't a pink slip. It was a promotion. Operations manager. Salary, $55,000. That raise bought us a 2-bedroom apartment. It bought Zachary his first computer. It bought me breathing room. I raised Zachary in break rooms and boardrooms. He didn't grow up with country clubs and etiquette lessons. He grew up with coding manuals and the hum of servers. He learned that respect isn't inherited. It is earned through competence. He saw his mother not as a victim, but as a machine that turned problems into solutions. By the time Zachary was 10, Helix Labs had been acquired, and I was the chief operating officer of the new parent company, Ether Biotech. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. I looked at my bank account one evening. The balance had 7 figures. I thought about Joseph and April in their manicured house, probably telling their friends I was dead or addicted to drugs. I felt a cold, sharp satisfaction. I had built a fortress they couldn't see, let alone enter. The chain was gone. I wasn't just free, I was formidable. Success is not loud. Real success is quiet. It is the hum of a Tesla pulling into a garage that costs more than my parents' entire house. It is the silence of a glass-walled sanctuary overlooking the Austin Hill country, a fortress of transparency in a world of secrets. I bought the glass house on the hill not because I needed the space, but because I wanted to look down on the city and know that I owned my view. I was 35. I was the chief operating officer of Ether Biotech, and to the people who birthed me, I was a ghost. I learned about my own death at a charity gala. An old acquaintance from my parents' country club spotted me near the Champagne Tower. She looked like she had seen a specter. "Stephanie?" she whispered, clutching her pearls. "But April told us you died in a car accident in Seattle 6 years ago." I didn't flinch. I just smiled, sharp and cold. "Did she?" I asked. "How tragic. I hope the funeral was tasteful." I walked away before she could ask another question. It wasn't just a lie. It was a PR strategy. Joseph and April hadn't just kicked me out. They had erased me. A dead daughter was a tragedy they could milk for sympathy. A living, successful daughter who hated them was a scandal they couldn't control. They had scrubbed me from the family narrative to protect their brand. It should have hurt. But pain requires attachment, and I had severed those nerve endings years ago. Their lies didn't wound me. They fueled me. Every time I closed a deal, every time I expanded our facility, I was building a monument to their irrelevance. I raised Zachary to value truth above all else. At 16, he was brilliant, kind, and tech-savvy. A young man who knew his mother built empires, not excuses. He was the living antithesis of everything my father said a bastard child would be. Then came the Tuesday that changed the variables. I was in my office, reviewing the quarterly projections, when my assistant pinged me. "Priority consult request, Stephanie." It came through the concierge channel. "High net worth individual, aggressive glioblastoma. They've been rejected by Hopkins and Mayo. We are their last stop." I opened the file. The name stared back at me from the digital screen in bold, black letters. Patient, Joseph Sterling, my father. I stared at the medical history. It was a grim read. Rapid degeneration, failing motor skills, desperation. He was dying, and the experimental neuroregeneration protocol we had just patented at Ether was his only statistical chance at survival. The universe didn't just have a sense of humor, it had a sense of irony. The man who had called me a liability now needed my assets to survive. The man who had evicted me for ruining his life was now begging for entrance into the house I built. He didn't know I ran Ether. He didn't know I was the gatekeeper. He just knew this facility was the best. I leaned back in my chair. I didn't feel glee. I felt the cold, hard click of a lock sliding into place. I picked up the phone. "Approve the preliminary consult," I said. "But flag the file. I want to handle the intake personally." I instructed my assistant to set the appointment location not at the clinic, but at the residence. Let them think it was some exclusive, concierge intake facility. Let them walk into the lion's den thinking it was a petting zoo. I gave the security team specific instructions. Clear the gate, escort them to the main atrium, offer them nothing but water. Saturday arrived with a sky the color of bruised iron. I stood at the top of the floating staircase in my glass house, watching the security feed. Their car, a leased Mercedes that was 3 years out of date, pulled up to the gate. I saw Joseph get out. He looked smaller. The arrogance was still there, but it was brittle now, a thin veneer over terror. April was beside him, looking around nervously, probably calculating the cost of the landscaping. They walked up the limestone path, their eyes scanning the sleek, modern architecture with a mix of awe and judgment. I knew exactly what they were thinking. Who owns this? What billionaire genius lives here? They were looking for a savior. They had no idea they were walking toward their reckoning. I waited until they were seated in the minimalist living room, surrounded by art they couldn't afford, and silence they couldn't fill. I descended the stairs slowly. The click of my heels on the polished concrete was the only sound in the cavernous room. They looked up. For a solid 10 seconds, nobody breathed. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. My father squinted, his brain misfiring, trying to reconcile the memory of the pregnant teenager he discarded with the woman standing before him in a tailored silk suit. "Stephanie?" April whispered, the word sounding like a question she didn't want answered. "Hello, Mother," I said. My voice was smooth, cool, professional. "Hello, Joseph." My father stood up, swaying slightly. What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice thin. Did you marry the doctor? Is this his house?" I almost laughed. Of course. That was the only logic their small minds could process. I must have married rich. I must have found a man to rescue me. The idea that I was the architect, the owner, the power in the room was simply impossible to them. "This is my house," I said, stepping off the last stair. "And Aether Biotech is my company. You requested a consult for the Sterling Protocol. I'm the one who has to sign off on it." The color drained from Joseph's face so fast I thought he might faint right there on my $5,000 rug. "You?" he choked out. "You run Aether?" "I built Aether," I corrected, "from the ground up. While you were telling your country club friends I was dead." April looked around the room again, but this time with terror. She realized the trap. They weren't here as parents. They weren't here as guests. They were applicants. And I was the admissions board. We didn't know," April stammered. "You thought I was a failure," I finished for her. "You thought I was a liability. And now, the liability is the only thing standing between your husband and a very painful end." I sat down in the armchair opposite them, crossing my legs. I didn't offer them a seat. "So," I said, opening the digital file on my tablet, "tell me why I should approve this allocation of resources. Convince me." The silence was brittle, waiting to shatter. Joseph started to stammer something about family, about second chances, but I raised a hand. "Save it," I said. "This is a medical intake, not a reunion. But before we discuss the protocol, there are 2 more members of the team you need to meet. My success wasn't built in a vacuum." I tapped a button on my phone. The door to the study opened. Zachary walked in. At 16, he was everything they had claimed a child born of my mistakes could never be. He was tall, wearing a crisp Oxford shirt and dark jeans, holding himself with a quiet, observant dignity. He didn't look like a delinquent. He looked like a future CEO. He walked over and stood beside my chair, resting a hand on the backrest, a subtle, protective gesture. "This is Zachary," I said. "My son. The grandson you erased." April made a small, wounded sound. She stared at him, searching for flaws, for signs of the struggle they had predicted. She found none. She found only a young man who looked back at her with cool, polite indifference. "Hello," Zachary said. His voice was steady. He didn't call them grandma or grandpa. He didn't offer a hug. To him, they were just clients. "And finally," I continued, "the lead neurosurgeon who developed the Sterling Protocol, the only man in the Western Hemisphere authorized to perform the procedure." The front door opened. Footsteps echoed in the hall, confident, heavy strides. Hunter walked in. He wasn't the boy in the leather jacket anymore. He was Dr. Hunter Vance, chief of neurology at Ether. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than Joseph's car, and his eyes were sharp, intelligent, and unforgiving. He walked straight to me, placing a hand on my shoulder before turning to face them. Joseph actually gasped. His face went from pale to a sickly gray. He recognized him. Of course he did. He was the loser he had forbidden me to see. The deadbeat who would ruin my life. "Dr. Vance?" Joseph whispered, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. "Mr. Sterling," Hunter replied. His tone was professional, icy. "I've reviewed your scans. It's aggressive. Most surgeons wouldn't touch it." The realization hit them like a physical blow. The room seemed to tilt. The daughter they discarded owned the building. The boyfriend they despised held the scalpel. And the grandson they ignored was the legacy they would never claim. We were the trinity of their failure, standing united, powerful, and utterly untouchable. "You." Joseph looked between us, his arrogance finally, completely crumbling into dust. "You're the team? We are the empire," I corrected. "You told me I was ruining my life with him. You told me this child would be a burden. Look at us, Joseph. Does this look like a burden?" April began to weep, soft, jagged sobs of pure regret. But it wasn't the regret of hurting me. It was the regret of realizing she had bet on the wrong horse. She looked at the luxury around us, at the son she didn't know, at the power we held, and she knew. They hadn't just lost a daughter, they had lost the winning lottery ticket. "Please," Joseph said, his voice cracking. "I want to live. I'll do anything." I looked at Hunter. He didn't nod. He didn't shake his head. He left the decision entirely to me. I looked at Zachary. He was watching me, learning what justice looked like. "Anything?" I asked. "Be careful with that word, Father. It's expensive." Joseph tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't hold him. He sank back into the chair, the fight draining out of him like water from a cracked jar. "Stephanie, please," he said, his voice trembling. "I know we made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but we're family. You can't let me die, not when you have the power to save me." I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized the monster of my childhood was just a small, frightened man in an expensive suit. He was trying to play the family card, the one he had burned 16 years ago. He thought family was a magic word that erased consequences. He was wrong. "Family," I repeated, tasting the word. It felt foreign in my mouth when addressed to them. "You kicked me out when I was 19 because I was inconvenient. You erased me from your lives because I didn't fit your brand. And now, you want to invoke family because you need something from me?" "We were scared," April sobbed. "We thought you were throwing your life away." "No," I corrected. "You were scared of what the neighbors would think. You chose your reputation over your daughter, and that choice has a price." I picked up the tablet. The authorization form was already loaded. All I had to do was tap approve. "I'm not going to save you because we're family," I said, my voice steady and cold. "Because we aren't. Not anymore. I'm going to save you because that is what my family does." I gestured to Hunter and Zachary. "We build, we heal, we solve problems. We are sowers, Joseph. We plant seeds in the dirt you left us in, and we grow forests. You are locusts. You consume. You destroy. And the only reason I am signing this is to show you the difference between us." I tapped the screen. "Approved." "The surgery is scheduled for Tuesday," I said, setting the tablet down. "Hunter will perform it. Not because he owes you anything, but because he is a professional who saves lives. Even the lives of people who called him worthless." Joseph stared at me, tears streaming down his face. But they weren't tears of gratitude. They were tears of shame. He realized that my mercy was the ultimate humiliation. I wasn't saving him out of love. I was saving him out of charity. I was giving him a handout, just like he had once feared I would need from him. "It's pro bono," I added, delivering the final blow. "I'm covering the cost. Consider it a donation to the needy." April flinched. The power dynamic had flipped so completely that the room seemed to spin. They were the charity cases now, and I was the benefactor. "Thank you," Joseph whispered, unable to meet my eyes. "Don't thank me," I said, standing up. "Just survive. Live long enough to remember every day who gave you that second chance. And live long enough to know that you will never, ever be part of this empire." I walked to the door and opened it. The sky outside was dark now, but the lights of my home blazed bright and warm. "The intake is complete," I said. "You can go." I watched them walk down the limestone path toward their leased car. They moved like elderly people, shoulders hunched, steps heavy. The arrogance that had carried them up that walkway 20 minutes ago had evaporated, leaving behind two strangers who had just realized they were the villains in their own story. They got into the car, the taillights flared red in the darkness, and then they were gone, driving back to a world where they were no longer the main characters. Hunter came up beside me. He didn't try to hug me or fix it. He just stood there, a solid, warm presence against the night air. "You saved his life," he said quietly, "and you destroyed his ego. That is a hell of a balance." "I didn't do it for him," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "I did it so I would never have to wonder if I was like them. They discard people who are inconvenient. I save people even when they don't deserve it. That is the difference." Zachary walked up on my other side. He looked at the empty driveway, then at me. "Are we going to see them again?" he asked. "No," I said. The word was simple, final, and lighter than air. "We aren't. There is a myth we are told from birth that blood is a binding contract. We are told that family is a permanent assignment, a debt we have to pay until we die. But that is a lie. Biology is an accident. Family is a choice. Joseph and April provided the DNA, but they forfeited the title of parents the moment they chose their reputation over my survival. For 16 years, I carried the ghost of their rejection. I let it drive me, let it fuel my ambition. But tonight, watching them drive away, I realized the fuel tank was empty. I didn't need their rejection to push me anymore. I didn't need their approval to validate me. I just needed them gone. I turned to look at the two men standing with me. Hunter, who had loved me when I had nothing. Zachary, who had taught me how to love without condition. This was the garden I had grown. This was the empire I had built. And it had no room for tourists who only wanted to visit when the weather was nice. "Come on," I said, stepping back inside. "It's getting cold." I closed the heavy front door. I turned the deadbolt. The click echoed through the atrium, sharp and decisive. It wasn't the sound of an ending. It was the sound of a vault locking shut, protecting the treasure inside. Share this story if you believe that family is defined by love, not blood. And don't forget to follow for more stories of resilience.